Well, hello, my chemistry chickadees. Glad to have you back. We're going to continue discussing chemical bonding. In our last series of video lectures, we mastered how to draw Lewis structures of molecules. Now we're going to look a little further. We're going to talk about shapes of molecules, valence bond theory, and then we'll move later on to what is called molecular orbital theory. First, let's talk about molecular shapes. We sort of hinted at the need to discuss this in our last video lecture where we talked about water, the molecule water, and how it's actually not a linear molecule, but it's actually a bent molecule. So let's see how we arrive at that. But first, let's go back. Let's go back to when we were maybe 5, 6 years old, and our mom or dad took us to the fair, and we wanted to have a balloon, a balloon on a stick. And not happy with one balloon, we then asked to have 2 balloons on a stick, and then maybe 3 and 4 and 5 balloons on a stick. And remember what happens when you put 2 balloons and you attach them on a stick as shown. They sort of spread out to get out of each other's way. Well, the same thing happens with pairs of electrons around a central atom. That is, these pairs of electrons, which are bonds or non-bonded pairs, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a second, but these pairs of electrons have to occupy space and they repel each other. So that if you have 2 pairs of electrons around a central atom, they will spread out as illustrated by the 2 balloons at the bottom right. Shown in this slide is what happens as we go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 balloons on a stick or pairs of electrons around the central atom. With 2 balloons, or 2 pairs of electrons, they will be on opposite sides of the stick or the central atom, 180 degrees apart. We'll see a little later that this will translate to a linear molecule. If you have 3 balloons, or 3 of these pairs of electrons, they spread out with a 120-degree angle in between. All 3 balloons, or pairs of electrons, lie on a plane. If you have 4 balloons, something interesting happens. They form what is called a tetrahedron, with 109 degrees between each of the balloon, central atom, balloon angles. If you have 5 balloons on a stick, or 5 of these pairs of electrons, it forms something called a trigonal bipyramidal geometry with what is called a trigonal plane and then an up position and a down position. With 6 balloons on a stick or 6 pairs of electrons around a central atom, you form an octahedral geometry, with 4 of these being in what is called the square plane and then an up and a down position. So this basically is the model that describes the shapes of molecules. Now I've given you a very simplified argument here, but this is called the valence shell electron pair repulsion theory for explaining the shapes of molecules. This slide goes from balloons to molecules. And if you look at the table part, in the first column is number of electron pairs. So we're going from balloons to now pairs of electrons. And if you have 2 of these electron pairs around a central atom, you would have the molecule as shown, a linear molecule, a central atom and then 2 lobes for the pairs of electrons, 180-degree bond angle. If you have 3 electron pairs, a trigonal planar geometry with a 120-degree bond angle. If you have 4 electron pairs, something called a tetrahedral geometry, where the bond angle is 109.5 degrees between any 2 positions. If you have 5 of these electron pairs, you have trigonal bipyramidal, which is a little more complicated geometry. So let me blow this up, as shown in the bottom left, where you see that you have something called this trigonal plane. The blue lines, by the way, are not really bonds, but are what I call guidelines, just so that you can see the trigonal plane. And then you have the top and bottom position. So you have a trigonal plane and an up and a down position. The top and the bottom position are called the axial positions, and the 3 on the plane are called the trigonal planar positions. Now, the reason for showing this is that there are different angles between any adjacent positions. As you can see, there's 90-degree bond angles between certain of the positions, the top positions, and any of the three trigonal planar positions. And between the individual trigonal planar positions, the bond angle is 120 degrees. So the trigonal bipyramidal is a little more complicated. But when we go to octahedral, 6 electron pairs, it actually simplifies because each of the positions now is equivalent and the bond angle is 90 degrees between any two positions, except of course the ones that are furthest apart, which is 180 degrees. Now, how do we count these electron pairs? In this slide, the first column is these electron pairs. Here it's called electron groups. I sometimes call these structural pairs. To arrive at the number of electron pairs, you count the number of sigma-bonded pairs of electrons around a central atom and non-bonded pairs of electrons around a central atom. What you do not count, NOT, not count, is pi-bonded pairs. And that's basically because the pi bonds have to follow where the sigma bonds already are, and we'll see that a little later on. So, electron pairs, you count the number of sigma-bonded pairs of electrons around a central atom plus non-bonded pairs. So if we go over to our example to the right, carbon dioxide, and if you look at the central carbon, it has 2 sigma-bonded pairs to the terminal oxygen atom. Again, we're not going to count the pi-bonded pairs. So its number of electron pairs is 2. That means it will have a linear geometry as we typically draw carbon dioxide, with the bond angle between the oxygen, carbon, and oxygen being 180 degrees. Going on to the next group, those molecules with 3 electron pairs around the central atom. And a few examples are given: boron trifluoride, sulfur dioxide. Here the basic electron geometry around the central atom is trigonal planar, and the bond angles will be 120 degrees. In some cases, I show here perhaps a little bit less than 120 degrees, and we'll talk about why that happens a little later on. Now, in the case of boron trifluoride, it's pretty clear that you would have boron in the middle and 3 fluorides leading to a flat molecule, a trigonal planar molecule. With sulfur dioxide, because it also has 3 electron pairs, or structural pairs around the central sulfur, it is trigonal planar, but one of these 3 positions is occupied by the pair of non-bonded electrons, which we really can't see. And so if we're looking only at the atoms, we would say that this is a bent molecule. Okay, let's now go to the next group in this table, which have 4 electron pairs, or 4 structural pairs. Here the basic geometry around the central atom is tetrahedral. And the prototypical tetrahedral geometry is formed by methane, carbon in the middle, and 4 hydrogens. A tetrahedral geometry meaning that there's 109.5 degrees between any hydrogen-carbon-hydrogen bond. Now, 2 other examples of molecules that form tetrahedral geometries are shown. One is ammonia, one is water. These molecules also have 4 electron pairs, because in these cases we're counting non-bonded pairs as well as the sigma-bonded pairs. And for these tetrahedral geometries, non-bonded pairs of electrons will fill 1 of these positions in ammonia and 2 of these positions in water. And if we look at water, because we've talked about it before, because of this, water is not a linear molecule but actually looks bent. It looks bent if you just look at the atoms, and the other 2 positions of the tetrahedron are filled with the 2 non-bonded pairs of electrons. In a future slide, we'll talk about why these bond angles are a little less than 109.5 degrees. Going on to cases where we have 5 electron pairs, 5 structural pairs, and 6 structural pairs. For 5 electron pairs, the basic geometry is trigonal bipyramidal. And again, if you recall from the previous slide, we have a trigonal plane in an up and a down position. The prototypical example of this is phosphorus pentachloride, shown as the first example in this table. And there, the bond angle between an axial position, let's say the top position, and the trigonal plane is 90 degrees, and the bond angle between any 2 trigonal plane atoms, chlorides in this case, is 120 degrees. The additional three examples in this table of trigonal bipyramidal molecules have non-bonded pairs of electrons in one of the positions. And if you look over to the left where I give you some hints, you'll see that one of the first hints is that a non-bonded pair is what I call more squat than a sigma bonded pair. That is, it's kind of like fatter and occupies more space. That being the case, we have to pay attention to where we place the non-bonded pairs. We have to put them in the least crowded position. And for a trigonal bipyramidal geometry, the least crowded position is actually the trigonal plane. It may not look that way as we draw them, but actually the trigonal plane is less crowded than the axial positions. And so if you look at my second example of sulfur tetrafluoride, the non-bonded pair will go in the trigonal plane position. As a result, this molecule, if you just look at the geometry of the atoms, would be, you might call it a seesaw molecule. The next example is bromine trifluoride, which has two non-bonded pairs. Where would these two non-bonded pairs go? Again, in the least crowded position, and that would be the trigonal plane position. As a consequence, this molecule, if you just looked at the position of the atoms, would be something you might call a T-shaped molecule. And the last example for trigonal bipyramidal is xenon difluoride. I bet you thought that xenon didn't form molecules. Well, it can form some molecules, and here's one. For xenon difluoride, we have three non-bonded pairs. Where do they go? Again, into the least crowded position, and that would be the trigonal plane. The fluorine atoms then go in the top and the bottom are the two axial positions. And so, since there is 180 degrees between these, this would look like a linear molecule. But its base geometry is really a trigonal bipyramidal molecule. And then we go to octahedrals, those with 6 structural pairs or 6 electron pairs. And the simplest example of that is sulfur hexafluoride. And in this case, the bond angle is 90 degrees between any two fluorines, except, of course, those that are furthest apart, like the top and bottom positions. They would be 180 degrees apart. So this would be a perfect octahedron. The next example is one in which there is a non-bonded pair among the 6 electron pairs. That would be bromine pentafluoride. Now here we have to place the non-bonded pair in some position. We said before that non-bonded pairs are more squat, they need more space, but each of the 6 positions in this octahedron is equivalent. So it doesn't matter which position we place the non-bonded pair for this particular case. Likewise, the last example, xenon tetrafluoride, has 2 non-bonded pairs. There's a total of 6, so it's an octahedral geometry. The question is, where do we place the 2 non-bonded pairs? Well, again, we place them in the least crowded position, but we said that all the positions are equivalent. But here, the one consideration is that because they need more space, we place them as far away as possible from each other. And typically, we draw the non-bonded pairs as being in the 2 axial positions, top and the bottom positions. Okay, so this has been our introduction to VSEPR theory and the structure of molecules. We'll pause now, and then in the next video lesson, we'll talk about valence bond theory. See you in a little bit.